At my grandmother's funeral, my cousin Jessica leaned over and whispered, "You don't even deserve to be here." I just nodded and walked to the front of the church. Then I opened the envelope the lawyer had given me and read aloud, "To my beloved granddaughter Madison, I leave my entire estate, including the ranch, all investments, and my collection. The rest of you know what you've done." The silence that followed was deafening. Now they won't stop calling me, begging me to remember. We're family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The November rain hammered against the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Presbyterian Church in Millbrook, Texas, creating a rhythmic backdrop to what should have been a solemn farewell. Instead, it felt more like a battlefield where old wounds were about to be ripped wide open. I sat in the third row, my black dress still damp from the dash through the parking lot, watching as my extended family filed into the pews around me. The Hartwell clan had gathered in full force for Grandma Ruth's funeral, and I could feel their eyes on me like laser beams. Whispered conversations stopped mid-sentence when I walked past.
That's turned.
Judgmental stares followed my every move. My cousin Jessica, perfectly polished in her designer black suit, slid into the pew beside me. Her perfume was overwhelming in the confined space, a cloying floral scent that made my stomach turn. Had always been the golden child of the family, the one who could do no wrong in everyone's eyes. Harvard MBA, successful marketing firm in Dallas, married to a surgeon. 2 perfect children who played violin and spoke French. "Madison," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I'm surprised you came." I kept my eyes forward, focused. On the ornate wooden casket at the front of the church was covered in white lilies, Grandma Ruth's favorite flowers. She used to grow them in her garden behind the old ranch house, tending to them with the same care she had shown me during those long summers when I was growing up. "Of course I came," I replied quietly. She was my grandmother, too. Jessica's laugh was sharp and bitter. "It's really because from what I remember, you haven't exactly been the most attentive granddaughter. When was the last time you even visited her? 2 years ago? 3. The accusation hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to remain calm. It was true that I hadn't visited as often as I should have in recent years. Life had gotten complicated. After my parents died in that car accident when I was 16, I bounced between relatives who treated me more like a burden than family. I'd struggled through college, working multiple jobs to pay for tuition that my trust fund couldn't cover because of some legal complications that no one ever fully explained to me. I was dealing with some things, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Dealing with things?" Jessica repeated mockingly. "Like what? Your little art hobby? Your failed gallery attempts? Your series of deadbeat boyfriends?" She leaned closer, her breath hot against my ear. "You know what Grandma Ruth used to say about you? She said you were the family disappointment. Always chasing dreams instead of facing reality." I felt something cold and sharp twist in my chest. Grandma Ruth had never said anything like that to me. During our phone calls, she'd always been encouraging about my art, asking about my paintings and sculpture work. She had even bought several pieces from my small exhibitions, displaying them proudly in her living room. "That's not true," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Jessica's smile was predatory. "Isn't it? Look around, Madison. Look at this family. Look at what we've all accomplished. My brother Daniel is a successful attorney in Houston. My sister Caroline runs 3 restaurants in Austin. Uncle Robert built a construction empire. Patricia is a judge. And then there's you." She gestured dismissively. 32 years old, living in that tiny apartment in Galveston, trying to sell watercolors to tourists. The words stung because they contained just enough truth to be devastating. I had struggled financially for years. My art career has been a series of small victories and crushing defeats. I worked part-time at a coffee shop to pay rent, and my apartment was indeed tiny, barely large enough for my easel and supplies. "You don't even deserve to be here," Jessica continued, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You abandoned her. We were the ones who visited every weekend. We were the ones who took care of her when she got sick. We were the ones who held her hand when she died. You were probably off somewhere painting sunsets, or whatever it is you do. Wanted to tell her that I had been there, that I had driven 6 hours from Galveston to Millbrook every few weeks, even when I could barely afford the gas. That I had called Grandma Ruth every Sunday evening without fail. That I had sent her cards and letters filled with photos of my latest work. But the words stuck in my throat, trapped by years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. The organ began to play, a somber melody that filled the high-ceilinged church. Reverend Matthews, a thin man with kind eyes who had known Grandma Ruth for decades, stepped up to the pulpit. The congregation quieted, and I felt Jessica shift beside me. Her attack momentarily paused. We gather today to celebrate the life of Ruth Elizabeth Hartwell, Reverend Matthews began, his voice carrying clearly through the church. A woman who touched the lives of everyone she met with her kindness, her wisdom, and her unwavering love for her family. As he spoke about Grandma Ruth's life, I found myself remembering those summers at the ranch. I was 8 years old the first time I stayed there for an extended period, sent away while my parents dealt with their failing marriage. Grandma Ruth had taken me in without question, given me my own room in the old farmhouse, and teaching me how to milk cows and gather eggs. She had been the one to first put a paintbrush in my hand, setting up a small easel on the back porch where I could paint the rolling hills and wildflowers that stretched for miles. She had been the one to encourage my creativity when everyone else in the family dismissed it as impractical. She had been the one to believe in me when I didn't believe in myself. Ruth was particularly devoted to her grandchildren, Reverend Matthews continued. She saw potential in each of them and worked tirelessly to nurture their individual gifts. I felt Jessica stiffen beside me. Her perfect composure was cracking slightly. I could see her jaw clench as the Reverend's words seemed to contradict the narrative she had been spinning. Now, Reverend Matthews said, Ruth asked that a special message be read at her service. She entrusted this task to her attorney, Mr. William Stanton, who has been handling her affairs for many years. A tall, silver-haired man in an expensive suit stood up from the front row. I recognized him as the lawyer who had called me 2 days ago to inform me of Grandma Ruth's death. He had been brief on the phone, simply telling me when and where. The funeral would be held, Mr. Stanton walked to the pulpit, carrying a sealed envelope. The church fell completely silent, except for the continued drumming of rain against the windows. Ruth Hartwell was one of the most thoughtful and deliberate people I have ever known, he began. She spent considerable time preparing this message, and she was very specific about how and when it should be delivered. He opened the envelope carefully, unfolding a single sheet of paper. I could see Grandma Ruth's distinctive handwriting from where I sat, the letters still elegant despite her age. She wrote this message herself in her own words, Mr. Stanton continued. She said, and I quote, I have watched my family for many years, and I have seen both great love and great disappointment. I have seen kindness and cruelty, loyalty and betrayal. I have seen some of you step up when others needed help, and I have seen others turn away when it was inconvenient to care. The tension in the church was palpable. I could feel people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Jessica's hand was gripping the back of the pew in front of us so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. I have made my decisions about my estate based not on what people said, but on what they did. It's not on promises, but on actions. It's not on blood relation, but on genuine love and care. My heart was racing. I had no idea what was coming, but I could sense that something significant was about to happen. To my beloved granddaughter, Madison Claire Hartwell, Mr. Stanton continued, and I felt the blood drain from my face. I leave my entire estate, including the ranch, all my investments and savings, and my complete art collection. You were the only one who truly saw me, who truly cared about me as a person rather than as a bank account. You were the only one who visited me not because you had to, but because you wanted to. The church erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. Jessica's face had gone completely white, and I could see Uncle Robert half rising from his seat in the front row. To the rest of my family, Mr. Stanton continued, his voice cutting through the noise, you know what you have done? You know how you treated Madison after her parents died? You know how you made her feel unwelcome and unwanted? You know how? You abandoned me in my final years, visiting only when it was convenient or when you needed something. You've shown your true colors, and I have made my decision accordingly." The whispers had turned to angry murmurs. I could feel dozens of eyes boring into me, filled with shock, rage, and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "That concludes Ruth Hartwell's message," Mr. Stanton said, folding the paper and returning it to the envelope. "The service will now continue with a reading from Psalms." But I wasn't listening anymore. The words were echoing in my head. The ranch, all investments and savings, the art collection. I had inherited everything. Everything that my cousins, aunts, and uncles had been expecting to divide among themselves. Jessica turned to me, hurt perfectly, composed mask finally slipping completely. Her face was a mixture of fury and disbelief. "This is impossible," she hissed. "There has to be some mistake. She wouldn't do this. She couldn't do this." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But even as she spoke, I could see the truth dawning in her eyes. Grandma Ruth had done exactly what she had planned to do. She had been watching all of us, judging us, and she had made her choice. The rest of the funeral service passed in a blur, sat in stunned silence while Reverend Matthews completed the ceremony, barely registering the hymns or the final prayers. I was vaguely aware of people filing out of the church, their voices rising in urgent whispered conversations. As I stood to leave, Jessica grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through the fabric of my dress. "This isn't over," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "We're going to contest this. We're going to fight it. You can't just waltz in here and steal what belongs to all of us." I looked at her for a long moment, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in my life. She wasn't the successful, confident woman I had always envied. She was scared, desperate, and greedy. "I didn't steal anything," I said quietly, pulling my arm free from her grip. Grandma Ruth made her own choices. As I walked out of the church and into the cold November rain, I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. Angry voices, urgent phone calls, the sound of a family tearing itself apart. I got into my old Honda Civic. It's the one I had bought 3 years ago, and sat there for a moment as the rain continued to fall. I thought about Grandma Ruth's words, about the ranch that was now mine, about the art collection she had mentioned. For the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: hope. The drive from Millbrook to Grandma Ruth's ranch took 45 minutes through winding country roads lined with oak trees, whose leaves had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson. I had made this journey countless times as a child, but today it felt different. Today I wasn't just visiting. I was coming home to a place that was now legally mine. The old iron gate stood open, just as it always had. The wooden sign reading Hartwell Ranch was weathered and faded, but still proudly displayed at the entrance. As I drove up the gravel driveway, my Honda's tires crunching on the small stones, I saw the house for the first time since Grandma Ruth's death. It was exactly as I remembered it: a sprawling 2-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch. It's painted white with forest green shutters. The rocking chairs where Grandma Ruth and I used to sit in the evenings were still there, though they looked lonely and abandoned. The flower beds she had tended so carefully were overgrown with weeds, and a few of the porch boards looked like they needed repair. I parked next to the old red barn and sat in my car for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. This morning I had Madison Hartwell, struggling artist and family disappointment. Now I was Madison Hartwell, ranch owner and heir to what Mr. Stanton had described as a substantial estate. My phone had been buzzing nonstop during the drive. Text messages from Jessica, calls from Uncle Robert, voicemails from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. I had turned the sound off after the first few, unable to deal with their demands and accusations. While I was trying to process everything, the front door key was exactly where Grandma Ruth had always kept it, under the third flower pot from the left on the porch. Some things never changed, even when everything else was turned upside down. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and old wood. The house was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the lace curtains. I walked slowly through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Taking in details I hadn't noticed during my last visit 6 months ago, the living room was exactly as I remembered it, with its overstuffed floral sofa and matching armchairs arranged around the stone fireplace. But as I looked more closely, I began to notice things that made my breath catch in my throat. On the mantelpiece, in places of honor, were 3 of my paintings' watercolors I had given Grandma Ruth over the years. One was a sunset over the ranch's back pasture, painted when I was 25 and still learning to capture light on canvas. Another was a portrait of the old barn, complete with the climbing roses that grew up its weathered sides. The third was more recent, a still life of wildflowers I had painted last spring and mailed to her for her birthday. In the corner of the room, on a small wooden easel, was a painting I didn't recognize. As I moved closer, I realized it was one of mine from years ago, a landscape of the creek that ran through the back of the property. I had painted it during one of my last extended visits when I was 28, and going through a particularly difficult period after another failed gallery showing, but it wasn't just displayed, it was professionally framed. The matting was museum quality. And there was a small brass nameplate at the bottom that read Creek Bend by Madison Hartwell. I had never seen this level of care taken with my work. Even in galleries, as I continued through the house, I found more of my paintings and sketches. They were everywhere, in the hallway, the dining room, even the kitchen. Some were pieces I remembered giving her, others were works I had thought were lost or forgotten. Each one was carefully preserved and beautifully displayed, treated with the kind of respect I had never received from the art world. In Grandma Ruth's bedroom, on the dresser beside her jewelry box, was a photograph I had never seen before. It showed the 2 of us from about 5 years ago, standing in front of the barn with paintbrushes in our hands. I was wearing an old smock covered in colorful splatters, and she was laughing at something I had apparently just said. We both looked genuinely happy, completely comfortable in each other's company. I picked up the photograph, studying our faces. This was the relationship Jessica and the others had never understood. It hadn't been about duty or obligation or keeping up appearances. It had been about genuine affection, shared interests, and mutual respect. Grandma Ruth had seen something in me that the rest of the family had missed or chosen to ignore. My phone buzzed again, and this time I decided to check the messages. The first was from Jessica, sent just 20 minutes after I had left the church. Madison, we need to talk immediately. This will not stand. Call me. The second was from Uncle Robert. Madison, I'm sure you're as shocked as we are. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss how to handle this situation fairly. The third was from my cousin, Daniel, Jessica's brother. There has obviously been some mistake with Grandma's will. We should all get together and sort this out before it goes any further. I scrolled through dozens of similar messages, each one more urgent and demanding than the last. They all had the same underlying theme. This was wrong. This was unfair. This needed to be fixed. Not one of them congratulated me or acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, Grandma Ruth had known exactly what she was doing. I walked back to the living room and sat down in Grandma Ruth's favorite armchair, worn leather. The recliner that had been her reading spot for as long as I could remember. On the table beside it was a stack of art books and magazines, along with a spiral notebook filled with her handwriting. Curious, I picked up the notebook and began to read. The entries were dated going back several months. They weren't diary entries exactly, but more like observations and thoughts. March 15th, Madison called today to tell me about her new series of paintings. She's so excited about trying a new technique with watercolors. I can hear the passion in her voice when she talks about her art. Jessica called yesterday to ask if I needed anything, but spent most of the conversation complaining about her children's school expenses. April 2nd, received a beautiful painting from Madison for my birthday. It's hanging in the living room now. Daniel visited last weekend with his family, but they seemed more interested in talking about the property values in the area than spending time with me. May 20th, Madison drove up for Mother's Day. We spent the afternoon painting together on the back porch. She brought all her supplies and taught me how to paint clouds. I haven't laughed that much in months. Robert stopped by briefly but left early to play golf. June 8th, Had to go to the hospital for some tests. Madison drove down immediately when I called, even though she had to miss work. She stayed 3 days to make sure I was okay. The others sent flowers. As I read through the notebook, a clear pattern emerged. Page after page documented the difference between my relationship with Grandma Ruth and everyone else's. While the family showed up for holidays and special occasions, treating their visits like obligations to be endured, I had maintained a genuine connection with her. The entries revealed things I hadn't even realized she had noticed. How? Always asked about her garden and remembered the names of her favorite flowers. How I listened when she told stories about her childhood. How I brought her small gifts. That showed I had been thinking about hurt supplies, books about painting, or simply flowers from my own small garden. In contrast, the notebook documented how the rest of the family treated her more like a duty than a person. They visited on schedule, brought expensive but impersonal gifts, and spent their time talking about their own achievements and problems rather than showing interest in her life. The final entry was dated just 2 weeks before her death. I've made my decision about the will. Madison is the only one who truly sees me as a person rather than an obligation. She's the only one who shares my love of beauty and creativity. She's the only one who calls just to talk, not because she needs something. The others will be angry, but they've made their choices over the years. Now I'm making mine. I closed the notebook, feeling a mixture of sadness and vindication. Grandma Ruth had been paying attention all along. She had been watching, evaluating, and ultimately judging based on actions rather than words or expectations. Sound from outside caught my attention, car doors slamming in the driveway. I looked out the window and felt my stomach drop. 3 vehicles were parked beside my Honda, Jessica's silver BMW, Uncle Robert's black pickup truck, and a white SUV I didn't recognize but assumed belonged to another family member. They had found me. I watched as 6 people climbed out of the vehicles. Jessica, Uncle Robert, Daniel, Caroline, and 2 others I recognized as distant cousins. They stood in the driveway for a moment, clearly strategizing their approach. Jessica was gesturing emphatically, obviously taking charge of whatever confrontation they had planned. They had come in force, probably expecting to intimidate me into agreeing to share the inheritance or renounce my claim entirely. They still saw me as the uncertain, insecure young woman who had always been pushed around by stronger personalities in the family. But as I sat in Grandma Ruth's chair, surrounded by evidence of her love and respect for me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Confidence. This wasn't a mistake or a fluke. This was the deliberate choice of a woman who had spent decades observing her family's true nature. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by loud knocking. Madison. Jessica's voice called through the door. We know you're in there.
We need
to talk. I stood up slowly, smoothing down my black dress and checking my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face was calmer than I expected, more composed than I felt. I looked like someone who belonged in this house, someone who had earned the right to be here. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Madison, open the door. We're not leaving until we sort this out. I walked to the front door and paused with my hand on the knob. Through the glass panels on either side of the door, I could see them clustered on the porch, their faces a mixture of determination and barely contained anger. For a moment, I considered not answering. I could wait them out, let them stand there until they gave up and left. But that would only delay the inevitable confrontation. They would keep coming back, keep pressuring me, keep trying to make me doubt myself and Grandma Ruth's decision. No, it was better to face this head on. I had spent too many years avoiding conflict, trying to keep the peace, accepting their treatment of me as somehow deserved. But I wasn't that person anymore. Grandma Ruth had seen something in me that was worth fighting for, and I owed it to her memory and to myself to stand my ground. I unlocked the door and opened it, looking out at the faces of my family. Hello, I said quietly. I wasn't expecting visitors. Jessica pushed forward, her perfectly styled hair slightly disheveled. From the wind, We need to talk, Madison. All of us. Right now. I stepped back and allowed them to enter, watching as they filed into Grandma Ruth's living room like a hostile invasion force. Jessica led the charge, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floors, followed by Uncle Robert, whose weathered face was set in grim lines. Daniel came next, still wearing his funeral suit, but having loosened his tie, and Caroline, whose usual bubbly demeanor had been replaced by cold calculation. The two cousins I barely knew, Marcus and Angela, hung back near the doorway, clearly uncomfortable, but committed to the family cause. "Sit down, Madison," Uncle Robert commanded, his voice carrying the authority he'd developed from decades of running construction crews. "We need to get to the bottom of this mess." "This is my house now," I replied calmly, remaining standing while they arranged themselves around the room. "I'll stand if I want to." Jessica's eyes flashed with anger. "Your house? Madison, this is family property. This ranch has been in the Hartwell family for 4 generations. You can't seriously think you have the right to keep it all to yourself." "I think Grandma Ruth made her wishes very clear," I said, moving to stand behind her leather chair, using it as a barrier between myself and their mounting hostility. "Mr. Stanton read her will in front of everyone at the church." Daniel stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Madison, you have to understand how this looks. A will that completely disinherits an entire family except for one person. That raises serious questions about undue influence, mental capacity, coercion. Are you suggesting I manipulated a dying woman?" I interrupted, feeling a spark of anger ignite in my chest. I somehow forced her to change her will. "We're not accusing you of anything," Carolyn said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "We're just saying that maybe Grandma wasn't thinking clearly in her final months. She was on a lot of medication. She was grieving the loss of her independence. She was sharp as a tack right up until the end," I said firmly. "She called me 3 days before she died to discuss a book she'd just finished reading about contemporary art movements." "Does that sound like someone who wasn't thinking clearly?" Uncle Robert's face darkened. 3 days before she died? And you didn't think to mention that she was declining that rapidly? Could you have what? I cut him off, rushed over to make sure you got one last chance to remind her how successful you all are. "How much are your businesses worth? How expensive are your children's schools?" The room fell silent. Marcus and Angela exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly recognizing the accuracy of my accusation. Jessica's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of anger spreading across her cheeks. "That's not fair, Madison. We all cared about Grandma Ruth. We all loved her. Did you?" I asked, moving away from the chair to face them directly, because I found her notebook upstairs. She kept track of every visit, every phone call, every interaction. "Would you like to know what she wrote about your last visit, Jessica?" Jessica's confident expression wavered slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." I walked to the side table where I had left the notebook and picked it up, flipping to a page from 2 months ago. "May 14th, I read aloud. "Jessica visited today with the children. Spent most of the time on her phone dealing with work calls. Asked if I needed anything but seemed relieved when I said no. The children were restless and kept asking when they could leave. Jessica mentioned that the property taxes on the ranch must be substantial and wondered if I'd ever considered selling to developers." The color drained from Jessica's face. She took that completely out of context. I was just making conversation. I continued reading. She also suggested I might be happier in a nice retirement community where I could have activities and people my own age. Said this place was too isolated and too much work for someone my age. Was concerned about her safety, Jessica protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Were you?" I flipped to another page. Here's what she wrote about Daniel's visit in April. "Daniel brought contracts for me to sign. Something about transferring the mineral rights to make things easier for the family when I'm gone. Told me it was just paperwork to save on taxes. I pretended to consider it, but I'm not stupid. They're already counting their inheritance." Daniel's professional composure cracked. "Those were legitimate estate planning documents designed to get you access to the oil and gas rights while she was still alive." I finished. "She saw right through it, Daniel. She saw through all of you." Uncle Robert stood up. Abruptly, his massive frame towering over the room. Enough of this nonsense. Madison, you're 22 years old? 32? I corrected.
Ike, what is her?
You're a kid who's never owned property, never managed investments, never dealt with the kind of responsibility that comes with an estate this size. You think you can? Just waltz in here and play ranch owner. This place requires constant maintenance, property tax payments, insurance, livestock management. I'll figure it out, I said simply. With what money? Caroline interjected. Madison, be realistic. You work part-time at a coffee shop. You drive a 15-year-old Honda. You live in an apartment that's smaller than most people's garages.
Ow.
How are you going to afford to maintain a 500-acre ranch? The same way Grandma Ruth did, I replied. She managed just fine living here by herself. Jessica laughed bitterly. You'll learn? Madison, this isn't like learning to paint with watercolors. This is serious business involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Actually, said a voice from the doorway, it's more than that.
Ow.
Turned to see Mr. Stanton standing in the entrance to the living room, his silver hair slightly mussed from the wind. I hadn't heard him arrive, but his presence was immediately commanding. Mr. Stanton, Uncle Robert said, his tone shifting too. Forced politeness. We weren't expecting you. I'm sure you weren't, the lawyer replied dryly, stepping into the room. But when the beneficiary of an estate receives multiple threatening phone calls and text messages within hours of the will reading, I consider it my duty to check on their welfare. No one was threatening anyone, Jessica said quickly. We're just trying to have a family discussion about what's best for everyone. Mr. Stanton pulled out his phone and began reading. Quote, Madison, you need to think carefully about what you're doing. This decision will tear the family apart. That's from Robert. Quote, don't let pride cloud your judgment. We can work this out if you're reasonable. That's from Daniel. Quote, I hope you realize what you're throwing away. Family's more important than money. That's from Jessica. Shall I continue? The room fell silent again. Mr. Stanton put his phone away and looked around at the assembled family members. I want to be very clear about something, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of legal experience. Ruth Hartwell was my client for over 20 years. I handled all of her legal affairs, including previous versions of her will. The document I read today was not a hastily made decision or the product of diminished capacity. It was the result of careful consideration over a period of 18 months. 18 months? Caroline asked weakly. That's correct, Mrs. Hartwell. First approached me about changing her will in May of last year. She spent months thinking about it, discussing her concerns with me, and making revisions. The final version was signed and witnessed just 6 weeks ago, when she was completely lucid and in full possession of her faculties. Uncle Robert's face was red with barely controlled anger. What concerns? What did she tell you? Mr. Stanton opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I'm not at liberty to discuss confidential attorney-client communications, but I can tell you that Mrs. Hartwell kept detailed records of her interactions with family members. She was particularly troubled by attempts to pressure her into making financial decisions that would benefit the family at her expense. He looked directly at Daniel. She was also concerned about family members who seemed more interested in her assets than her well-being. Daniel's face flushed. Mr. Stanton, if you're implying I'm not implying anything, the lawyer cut him off. I'm stating facts. Mrs. Hartwell documented every attempt to influence her financial decisions. Every suggestion that she'll sell the ranch, every conversation about inheritance. She was not a foolish old woman being taken advantage of. She was a sharp, observant person who saw exactly what was happening and made her decisions accordingly. Jessica stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. This is insane. Madison barely visited her. We were the ones who were here, who took care of things, who visits on average once every 6 weeks, Mr. Stanton interrupted. Consulting the folder, according to Mrs. Hartwell's records, Madison visited or called every week without fail. She was the only family member who maintained regular, consistent contact that wasn't tied to holidays or special occasions. He closed the folder and looked around the room. Ladies and gentlemen, this will is legal, binding, and ironclad. It was prepared by a competent attorney, signed by a competent testator, and properly witnessed. Any attempt to contest it will fail and will result in significant legal expenses for the challengers. The finality in his voice seemed to drain the fight out of most of them. Marcus and Angela were already edging toward the door, clearly wanting to escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation. Furthermore, Mr. Stanton continued, I should mention that Mrs. Hartwell anticipated there might be attempts to pressure Madison into sharing the inheritance. She specifically included a provision that if Madison feels threatened or coerced by family members, she has the option to invoke additional protections I've prepared. What kind of protection? Uncle Robert asked suspiciously. Mr. Stanton smiled. Slightly. Let's just say that Mrs. Hartwell was very thorough in her planning. She wanted to ensure that Madison could enjoy her inheritance without harassment. Jessica looked like she wanted to say something else, but Daniel put a restraining hand on her arm. The lawyer in him clearly recognized that they were fighting a losing battle. Madison, he said finally, his tone shifting to something that might have been conciliatory. We hope you'll consider what's best for the family. Grandma Ruth built something here that's bigger than any one person. I looked around the room at these people who shared my blood but had never shared my life. For years, I had wanted nothing more than to belong, to be accepted, to find my place in this family. But standing here now, I realized that I had already found my place. It was here, in this house, surrounded by evidence of love and respect. From the one person who had truly seen me, You're right, I said quietly. Grandma Ruth did build something bigger than any one person. She built a legacy of kindness, creativity, and genuine care for others. She left it to someone she trusted to continue that legacy. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. I think it's time for you all to leave now. A long day, and I have a lot to think about. One by one, they filed out, their faces a mixture of defeat, anger, and calculation. I knew this wasn't over. They would regroup, consult their own lawyers, try to find another angle of attack. But for now, they were leaving, and I was staying in the place that was finally, truly mine. After the family left and Mr. Stanton's car disappeared down the gravel driveway, I found myself alone in the ranch house for the first time since inheriting. The silence was profound. No angry voices, no accusations, no demands. Just the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock and the distant sound of wind rustling through the oak. Trees outside, I walked through the house again, but this time with different eyes. Instead of seeing it as a place I was visiting, I began to see it as my home. The realization was both thrilling and overwhelming. I owned this house, this land, and according to Mr. Stanton, substantial investment portfolio that I knew nothing about, in Grandma Ruth's study, a room I had rarely entered as a child. I began to understand the true scope of what she had left me. The mahogany desk was covered with organized stacks of documents, insurance policies, bank statements, stock certificates, and property deeds. Everything was meticulously labeled and filed, clearly arranged for easy review. A sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma Ruth's handwriting lay in the center of the desk. Inside, I found a letter dated just 3 weeks before her death. My dearest Madison, if you're reading this, then my plan has worked and you're sitting in my study as the new owner of everything I've built. I imagine you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe even a little guilty. Don't be. You earned this through years of genuine love and care, not through blood relation or expectation. I want you to know that this decision wasn't made lightly or in anger. I've been watching this family for decades, seeing how people change when money is involved. I've seen kindness turn to calculation, love turn to greed, and family bonds dissolve under the pressure of inheritance expectations. You were different. You never asked me for anything except my time and attention. You never hinted about what you might inherit or suggested I change my living arrangements to benefit the family finances. You saw me as Ruth, not as a bank account with legs. Check. The locked drawer in my desk, the key is taped under the lamp base. Inside, you'll find information about your parents' trust fund that the family has been managing since their death. I think it's time you knew the whole truth about your financial situation. I love you, sweet girl. Build something beautiful here always, Grandma. Ruth, my hands trembled as I reached for the lamp, finding the small brass key exactly where she said it would be. The locked drawer slid open to reveal a thick folder labeled Madison's Trust Family Management Records. As I opened the folder, my breath caught in my throat. Inside were bank statements, investment records, and legal documents dating back 16 years, just after my parents' death. According to the first document, my parents had left me a substantial trust fund, nearly $800,000 in life insurance proceeds and investments, to be managed by the family until I turned 25. But, as I read through the statements, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The trust had been systematically drained over the years through administrative fees, emergency family loans, and investment expenses. Uncle Robert had borrowed $75,000 for his construction business in 2015, promising to repay it within 2 years. Jessica had taken $45,000 for her children's private school tuition in 2018. Daniel had charged the trust nearly $30,000 in legal fees for managing Madison's interests. By the time I turned 25, the trust, that should have contained nearly $1 million, held less than $50,000. That small amount had been given to me with great fanfare, presented as generous family support for my artistic pursuits. I had been grateful for it, using the money to pay for my art supplies and rent during a particularly difficult period. But now I realized the truth. They had stolen from me. For 16 years, they had used my inheritance as their personal piggy bank, taking what they needed and leaving me with scraps. No wonder Jessica had been so confident, calling me the family disappointment. They had actively sabotaged my financial future while positioning themselves as my generous benefactors. A handwritten note from Grandma Ruth was clipped to the final page. They thought I didn't know, but I've been tracking this for years. Every loan, every fee, every dollar they took from you is documented here. They stole your future and then blamed you for struggling. I sat back in the leather desk chair, stunned by the magnitude of their betrayal. Everything suddenly made sense. Why I had always felt like such a burden to them. Why they had seemed so confident in their superiority. Why they had been so shocked by Grandma Ruth's will reading. They had been living off my money for years, using it to fund their comfortable lifestyles while I scraped by on coffee shop wages. My phone buzzed with another text message. It's this one from Daniel. Madison, we need to meet tomorrow. There are legal matters regarding the estate that need immediate attention. Don't make any decisions without proper counsel. I almost laughed at the irony. He was trying to position himself as my advisor again, just as he had been doing since I turned 18. How many of his legal services had been paid for with my own money? As I continued reading through the documents, I discovered something else that made my blood boil. In 2019, when I had been evicted from my apartment due to financial difficulties, I had called Uncle Robert in desperation, asking if I could borrow $2,000 to cover my moving expenses and security deposit for a new place. He had lectured me about financial responsibility and told me the family couldn't afford to bail me out of my problems, according to the trust records. That same month, he had taken $15,000 from my account for emergency business expenses related to his construction company. They had let me struggle, let me feel ashamed of my financial situation, while they lived comfortably off money that rightfully belonged to me. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I picked up my phone and scrolled through the angry messages they had been sending all evening. Their desperation was now completely transparent. They weren't upset about losing Grandma Ruth's inheritance. They were terrified that I might discover what they had done with mine. A new text from Jessica appeared. Madison, please don't let pride get in the way of family. We can work together to make sure everyone benefits from Grandma's estate. Stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I found the trust records. The response came almost immediately. What trust records? I don't know what you're talking about. I took a photo of one of the bank statements showing her $45,000 withdrawal and sent it to her. Then I sent similar photos to Uncle Robert and Daniel, each showing their various loans and fees. My phone immediately started ringing. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, but I declined the call. Rang again and again. Then Uncle Robert tried calling, and Daniel. I turned the phone off and set it aside. Let them panic. them scramble to come up with explanations and excuses. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to handle this revelation. In another folder, I found Grandma Ruth's financial records for the ranch and her investment portfolio. The numbers were staggering. The property alone was worth nearly $2 million, and her investment portfolio contained another $1.8 million in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The oil and gas leases on the property generated approximately $15,000 per month in passive income. I was not just comfortable, I was wealthy. Wealthier than any of them had ever imagined. But more than that, I finally understood why Grandma Ruth had been so deliberate in her planning. She hadn't just been leaving me money. She had been giving me justice. She had seen what they did to me, how they had stolen from me, and then looked down on me for being poor. She had waited, watched, and planned her revenge with the patience of someone who understood that true justice is a dish best served cold. I found one final document in the folder, a detailed accounting prepared by a private investigator grandma. Ruth had hired. Every dollar taken from my trust was documented, cross-referenced, and verified. She had been building a case, gathering evidence, preparing for exactly this moment. At the bottom of the investigator's report was a note in Grandma Ruth's handwriting. Madison deserves to know the truth. She also deserves the chance to decide what to do about it. The evidence is here if she chooses to pursue legal action. Legal action, I could sue them. I could take them to court and force them to repay every penny they had stolen from me, plus interest and damages. With this documentation, I would almost certainly win. But as I sat in the quiet study, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, I realized that I had something even more powerful than a lawsuit. I had leverage. I had the ability to choose their fate just as they had once chosen mine. My phone vibrated against the desk where I had left it. Even though it was turned off, I could see the screen lighting up with notification after notification. They were desperate now, probably calling and texting frantically, trying to reach me before I had time to fully process what I had discovered. I turned the phone back on long enough to read the latest messages. Uncle Robert, Madison, we need to talk immediately. There are things you don't understand about trust management. Daniel, Madison, please call me. I can explain the trust situation. Everything was done legally and with proper documentation. Jessica, Madison, families make mistakes. We can fix this. Don't let anger destroy our relationships. Caroline, Madison. I don't know what's going on, but Mom and Dad are really upset. Whatever it is, we can work it out. I almost felt sorry for Caroline. She was only 28, probably had no idea what the older generation had been doing with my money. But the others, Uncle Robert, Daniel, Jessica, they all knew exactly what they had done. As I read through their increasingly frantic messages, I began to smile. By the first time in my adult life, I held all the cards. They had spent years making me feel small, dependent, grateful for their scraps. Now they were the ones who needed something from me. I had a choice to make. I could pursue justice through the courts, or I could pursue it through something far more personal and immediate. I could make them come to me, make them beg, make them acknowledge what they had done. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of my new power. I needed to talk to Mr. Stanton about the legal protections Grandma Ruth had mentioned. I needed to understand exactly what options I had. I picked up the phone and dialed the lawyer's number. He answered on the second ring. Mr. Stanton? Madison, I found the trust records. I think we need to talk. Mr. Stanton arrived at the ranch the next morning, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the expression of someone who had been expecting this conversation for months. I met him at the front door with coffee and a clear-head eye. I'd spent most of the night reading through every document in Grandma Ruth's study. I finally understood the full scope of what she had orchestrated. I've been wondering when you'd find those records, he said as we settled into the living room. Ruth was very specific about where to place them and when you'd likely discover them. She said you'd need a night to process the inheritance before you could handle the truth about the trust. How long have you known? I asked, pouring coffee from the pot I'd prepared. I've known about the trust mismanagement for about 3 years, he replied, opening his briefcase. Ruth hired a forensic accountant to investigate after she noticed some discrepancies in the annual statements the family was providing her. She was listed as a secondary beneficiary on your parents' life insurance, so she received copies of all the trust documentation. He pulled out another thick folder. She spent 2 years building an airtight case. Every transaction is documented. Every loan is tracked. Every fraudulent fee is cataloged. The evidence is overwhelming. Why didn't she do something about it sooner? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Mr. Stanton smiled grimly, because she was playing a longer game. Ruth knew that if she exposed them while she was alive, they would find ways to minimize their responsibility, maybe even turn the family against her. She wanted to ensure that when the truth came out, you would be in a position of strength, not vulnerability. He opened the folder and spread several documents across the coffee table. The total amount stolen from your trust, including compound interest they should have earned, comes to approximately $1.4 million. But that's not all. I felt my breath catch. What do you mean? Ruth discovered that they've been using your trust as collateral for several business loans. Robert's construction company has been borrowing against the trust fund for years. Jessica used the trust as a cosigner for her house mortgage. Has been charging the trust rent for office space, where your trust documents were supposedly stored, which turned out to be a storage unit that cost $89 per month. The audacity of it was staggering. They hadn't just stolen from me, they had turned my inheritance into their personal financial empire. There's more, Mr. Stanton continued. The trust originally included a clause that would have given you access to the principal amount when you turned 30, but Daniel, acting as the trust administrator, had that clause quietly removed in 2019, claiming it was for your own financial protection. I remembered 2019. That was the year I had been evicted, the year I had called Uncle Robert begging for help. They had convinced me that I was irresponsible with money, while simultaneously stealing mine and using legal technicalities to prevent me from accessing what was rightfully mine. So what are my options? Mr. Stanton leaned back in his chair. Legally, you have several paths forward: criminal prosecution for fraud and embezzlement, civil litigation to recover damages with interest. You could also pursue professional sanctions against Daniel for legal malpractice and breach of fiduciary duty. Realistically, you have enough evidence to destroy all of them financially and professionally. Robert's construction business would collapse if he had to repay what he owes with interest. Jessica would lose her house. Daniel would likely be disbarred. I stared at the documents spread across the table, each one representing years of betrayal and manipulation. What did Grandma Ruth want me to do? Mr. Stanton reached into his briefcase and pulled out one final envelope. She left you this: instructions for what she called Operation Justice. Inside the envelope was a detailed plan written in Grandma Ruth's careful handwriting. It was brilliant, ruthless, and perfectly calculated to give me maximum leverage while minimizing my risk. Phase 1. Let them panic. Allow them to come to me with increasingly desperate offers and explanations. Phase 2. Reveal my knowledge gradually, making them understand the scope of what I knew without immediately threatening legal action. Phase 3. Present them with a choice: face criminal prosecution and financial ruin, or accept my terms for resolution. The terms she had outlined were elegant in their justice. Each family member would repay what they had stolen with interest over a period of 5 years. Robert would deed over a portion of his construction company to me. Jessica would transfer ownership of her vacation condo in Colorado. Daniel would provide legal services to me free of charge for 10 years and establish a fund for young artists. But the most beautiful part of the plan was the final condition. They would all sign sworn affidavits acknowledging their theft and apologizing for their treatment of me over the years. These affidavits would be held by Mr. Stanton, to be released publicly if they ever spoke badly about me again or failed to meet their payment obligations. Not just about the money, I said, understanding Grandma Ruth's strategy. It's about making them acknowledge what they did. Exactly. Ruth knew that what hurt you most wasn't the financial loss, though that was significant, but the way they made you feel worthless and dependent while they were stealing from you. This plan forces them to confront their actions and make amends. Phone, which had been mercifully quiet during our meeting, suddenly came alive with a barrage of calls and texts. I glanced at the screen to see Jessica's name. "We're getting desperate," Mr. Stanton observed. According to Ruth's timeline, this is when they would start making serious mistakes. I answered the phone. "Hello, Jessica." "Madison?" Her voice was strained, almost frantic. "Thank God you answered. We need to meet today. All of us. Is been a misunderstanding about the trust fund that we need to clear up immediately." "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked, enjoying the way her composure was cracking. "It's complicated. Legal stuff. But we can explain everything if you'll just give us a chance. Can you meet us at the lawyer's office in town? Daniel has all the paperwork." "Actually, I think I'd prefer to meet here at the ranch," I said. "Lawyer is here with me, and we've been reviewing some documents. It might be better if you all came here." There was a long pause. "Your lawyer, Mr. Stanton? You remember him from yesterday?" Another pause. Then Jessica's voice, trying to sound casual. "Of course, that's fine. We'll be there in an hour." I hung up. Mr. Stanton nodded approvingly. Perfect. Ruth predicted they would try to control the meeting location to maintain some sense of authority. By forcing them to come here to your territory, you're already establishing dominance. "What if they don't agree to the terms?" I asked. "Then we proceed with criminal charges and civil litigation." Ruth left you with overwhelming evidence and unlimited financial resources to pursue justice through the courts. But she believed that, when faced with the choice between public humiliation and private accountability, they would choose the latter. And if they try to fight it, claim the evidence is fabricated, or that Grandma Ruth was incompetent when she gathered it. Mr. Stanton smiled. Ruth anticipated that too. The forensic accountant she hired is one of the best in the state. The private investigator she used is a former FBI agent. Every piece of evidence was gathered legally and documented thoroughly. More importantly, some of their theft was so recent that bank records and digital transactions are easily verifiable. I felt a surge of gratitude for Grandma Ruth's meticulous planning. She had thought of everything, covering every possible angle and objection. As we waited for the family to arrive, Mr. Stanton helped me arrange the documents on the dining room. Table bank statements, loan documents, fraudulent fee records, and the private investigator's comprehensive report. Each stack was labeled with a family member's name and the total amount they owed. "Remember," Mr. Stanton said, as we heard cars pulling into the driveway, "you hold all the power here. They need your mercy more than you need their cooperation. Ruth spent years positioning you for this moment. Don't let them manipulate you into feeling guilty for their crimes." Through the window, I watched them get out of their carsuncle. Robert looking haggard and older than his 62 years. Jessica clutching her designer purse like a lifeline. Daniel carrying a briefcase that probably contained whatever legal arguments he had hastily prepared, and Caroline looking confused and frightened. They walked up to the front door slowly, like condemned prisoners approaching the gallows.
Ow.
For the first time in my life, they were afraid of me. I opened the door. Before they could knock, standing in the doorway with new confidence, "Please, come in. We have a lot to discuss." As they filed into the dining room and saw the organized evidence of their crimes spread across the table, the color drained from their faces. Uncle Robert actually stumbled slightly, catching himself on the back of a chair.
"Addison, Daniel,"
began, his lawyer's training kicking in before we discuss anything. "I want you to know that we're prepared to offer you a very generous settlement regarding any perceived irregularities in the trust management, perceived irregularities." I interrupted, picking up the stack of documents with his name on it. "Daniel, you charged my trust fund $127,000 in legal fees over the past 8 years. For comparison, that's more than most people spend on law school tuition. What exactly were you doing that was worth $127,000 of my money?" His mouth opened and closed without sound. For the first time since I'd known him, the smooth-talking lawyer was speechless. I looked around the room at their terrified faces and felt something I'd never experienced before. Complete and total. Control over my family's fate. "Now," I said, settling into the chair at the head of the table, "let's talk about justice." The silence in the dining room was deafening as they processed the evidence laid out before them. Jessica's perfectly manicured hands trembled as she picked up one of the bank statements, Showing her withdrawal of $45,000, Uncle. Robert's face had gone ashen as he stared at the loan documents that revealed how he'd been using my trust as collateral for his business ventures. Madison, Carolyn said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea. I swear I never knew about any of this. I looked at my youngest cousin, seeing genuine shock and distress in her eyes. She was only 14 when our parents died, probably never involved in any family financial discussions. I believe you, Carolyn, I said gently. This doesn't involve you. She nodded gratefully and moved to sit in a chair away from the others, clearly wanting to distance herself from what was about to unfold. Daniel finally found his voice, though it lacked its usual confident authority. Madison, I know how this looks, but you have to understand the context. Managing a trust fund is complicated. There are administrative costs, legal requirements, tax implications. Stop, I said firmly, holding up my hand. Before you dig yourself deeper into this hole, let me show you something. I picked up the private investigator's report and opened it to a page I had bookmarked the night before. This is a detailed analysis of trust management fees charged by professional financial institutions for accounts similar to mine. The average annual fee ranges from 0.5% to 1.5% of the total assets. I looked directly at Daniel, or 16. Years you should have charged between $40,000 and $120,000 in total fees. You charged $127,000 in the first 3 years alone. By 2019, your cumulative fees exceeded $300,000. Uncle Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Now hold on, Madison. Daniel was doing us a favor by managing your trust. He could have been charging a lot more if we'd used an outside firm. Really? I turned to another section of the report. Because this analysis shows that if my trust had been managed by a professional firm, it would currently be worth $1.8 million instead of the $50,000 I actually received. Even accounting for professional management fees, I would have received over 30 times more money. Jessica finally spoke, her voice cracking slightly. Madison, we were family. We were trying to help you. Some of those transactions were made during difficult times when you thought about what? I interrupted. You thought I wouldn't find out? When you thought I was too stupid to understand financial documents? When you thought Grandma Ruth would never discover what you were doing? I stood up and began walking around the table, feeling like a prosecutor addressing a jury. Let me tell you what I think happened. I think you saw a grieving 16-year-old girl who had just lost her parents, and you saw an opportunity. You saw $800,000 that you could access legally as my trustees, and you convinced yourselves that you deserved it more than I did. Uncle Robert's face flushed red. That's not how it was, Madison. We had expenses, business opportunities that would benefit the whole family, like the beach house in Galveston that you bought in 2016. I pulled out another document. $150,000 purchase price, financed with a loan that used my trust as collateral. You've been renting it out for the past 7 years, collecting income from a property that was essentially bought with my money. His jaw dropped. How did I find out? Because Grandma Ruth hired professionals to investigate every single transaction. She spent 2 years building this case, documenting your crimes, preparing for this exact moment. Mr. Stanton, who had been quietly observing from his position near the window, finally spoke. I think it would be beneficial for everyone if Madison explained her proposal before this conversation becomes even more adversarial. I nodded and returned to my seat at the head of the table. Here's what's going to happen. You have a choice to make, and you need to make it today. I picked up Grandma Ruth's handwritten plan and began reading her terms aloud. Option 1. I file criminal charges for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. Based on the evidence we have, Uncle Robert will likely face 5 to 7 years in federal prison. Jessica will face 2 to 4 years. Daniel will face disbarment and 8 to 10 years in prison as the trustee who orchestrated most of the theft. Jessica made a small gasping sound, and Uncle Robert's hands clenched into fists. Option 2, I continued. You accept my terms for private resolution? You acknowledge your crimes in writing, agree to full restitution with interest, and submit to ongoing oversight to ensure compliance. What kind of terms? Daniel asked, though his voice suggested he was afraid to hear the answer. I opened Grandma Ruth's folder and pulled out a detailed repayment plan. Uncle Robert, you will transfer 40% ownership of Hartwell Construction to me immediately. You will also deed the Galveston Beach house to me, since it was purchased with my money. Additionally, you will pay me $15,000 per month for the next 5 years to cover the remaining amount you stole. Plus interest. Uncle Robert's face went purple. 40% of my company, Madison? That business is my life's work. Built with my money? I replied calmly. According to our calculations, the $200,000 you took from my trust, invested wisely, would be worth approximately $400,000 today. 40% of your company is valued at $380,000. You're actually getting a discount. I turned to Jessica. You will transfer ownership of your Colorado condo to me. You will also pay me $8,000 per month for 5 years. If you can't afford those payments, you can sell your house and downsize to something more modest. Jessica's face crumpled. Madison, please. That condo is where we take the kids for skiing. It's been in the family for it. Was bought with money stolen from my family. I cut her off. Consider yourself lucky that I'm not demanding your primary residence as well. Finally, I looked at Daniel. You present the most interesting case, since your theft was both financial and professional. You will provide all legal services to me free of charge for the next 10 years. You will also establish and fund a $100,000 scholarship program for young artists, administered through the local community college. Additionally, you will pay me $12,000 per month for 5 years. Daniel's professional composure had completely evaporated. Madison, those terms would bankrupt me. I have a mortgage, college tuition for my kids, office expenses. Then you should have thought of that before you stole from an orphan teenager. I said without sympathy. But here's the truly beautiful part of Grandma Ruth's plan. I pulled out the final document, a sworn affidavit template. Each of you will sign a detailed confession acknowledging exactly what you did, when you did it, and why it was wrong. You will apologize in writing for your treatment of me over the years. These documents will be held by Mr. Stanton. What's the catch? Uncle Robert asked suspiciously. If you ever speak badly about me again, if you ever try to turn other family members against me, if you miss a single payment or fail to meet any of your obligations, these confessions become public record. They'll be sent to your business partners, your clients, your neighbors, your children's schools, and posted on social media. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Caroline quietly crying in the corner. The others looked like they had been physically struck. You have 1 hour to decide, I announced, standing up. Mr. Stanton will be here to witness your signatures if you choose option 2. If you choose option 1, he'll file the criminal charges on Monday morning. Jessica stood up shakily. Madison, please. We're family. We made mistakes, but we can work this out. These terms are so harsh. Harsh? I felt 16 years of suppressed anger finally break free. Do you know what harsh is, Jessica? Harsh is being evicted from your apartment because you can't afford rent. While your family lives in houses bought with your money, harsh is working 3 jobs to pay for college while your cousins attend Ivy League schools on scholarships funded by your trust. I walked over to stand directly in front of her. Harsh is calling your uncle begging for $2,000 to avoid homelessness and being lectured about financial responsibility while he's got $15,000 of your money in his checking account. My voice rose as years of humiliation and pain poured out. Harsh is sitting in this very room yesterday. He's being told you don't deserve to be at your own grandmother's funeral by people who have been stealing from you for 16 years. Jessica stepped back, tears streaming down her face. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We always planned to pay you back when, I demanded. When you died and left me, whatever scraps remained. When you felt generous enough to throw me a few $1,000s and pat yourselves on the back for being charitable. Uncle. Robert stood up, his face twisted with anger. Madison, you're being unreasonable. Those terms are impossible. You're talking about destroying our lives over money that we use to help the family? Help the family? I laughed bitterly. You mean help yourselves? Every dollar you took was a dollar that could have helped me build a career, buy a home, start a family of my own. Instead, I've spent 16 years believing I was the family failure while you lived off my inheritance. I walked to the window and looked out at the ranch that was now mine, feeling a sense of power and purpose I had never experienced before. 1 hour, I repeated without turning around. You choose wisely. Because unlike the choices you made 16 years ago, this one has consequences you can't hide or manipulate your way out of. I heard chairs scraping against the floor as they filed out of the dining room, their whispered conversations urgent and desperate. Through the window, I watched them gather around Uncle Robert's truck, gesticulating wildly as they tried to figure out their next move. Caroline approached me hesitantly. Madison, I know I don't have any right to ask, but what's going to happen to the family? I looked at my youngest cousin, seeing something in her eyes that I had never seen from the others. Genuine remorse and concern for someone other than herself. That depends on them, Caroline, I said softly. They can choose accountability and rebuilding trust, or they can choose to double down on their lies and face the consequences. Either way, the family you knew, one built on secrets and stolen money's over. She nodded sadly and left to join the others outside. I remained at the window, watching them argue amongst themselves, knowing that in less than an hour my life would change forever. One way or another, justice was finally coming to the Hartwell family. 50-7 minutes had passed when they finally knocked on the front door. I had spent the time sitting in Grandma Ruth's chair, reading through her personal journals and letters, understanding more deeply how carefully she had orchestrated this moment. She had known exactly how they would react, exactly what arguments they would make, and exactly what choice they would ultimately be forced to accept. Mr. Stanton answered the door and led them back into the dining room. They looked defeated. Uncle Robert's usual commanding presence had shrunk to that of a broken man. Jessica's perfect composure was completely shattered, and Daniel appeared to have aged 10 years in the past hour. "Yes, we accept your terms," Daniel said quietly, his voice barely audible. "All of them?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from their posture. "All of them," Uncle Robert confirmed, his voice hoarse. "But Madison, you have to understand." "No," I interrupted firmly. "There are no conditions, no explanations, no justifications. You accept the terms completely, or we proceed with criminal charges." "Which is it?" Jessica stepped forward, her mascara smudged and her hands shaking. "We accept them completely, without conditions." Mr. Stanton opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of legal documents. "I have the confession affidavits prepared, along with property transfer documents and repayment agreements. Each of you will need to read through your specific terms and sin in front of witnesses." As they began the process of signing away their stolen wealth, I noticed Caroline standing near the doorway, still looking overwhelmed by everything she had learned about her family. "Caroline," I called out, "you don't need to be here for this. Why don't you wait in the living room?" She nodded gratefully and left, clearly wanting no part of the formal proceedings. One by one, they signed the documents that would reshape their lives. Uncle Robert's hand shook as he signed over 40% of his construction company and the deed to the beach house. Jessica wept openly as she transferred ownership of her Colorado condo and agreed to the monthly payment schedule. Daniel's lawyer training showed as he read every word carefully, but his signature was steady when he finally acknowledged his crimes in writing. The confessions were the most difficult part for them. Watching them write out detailed acknowledgments of their theft, their manipulation, and their years of making me feel worthless was deeply satisfying. These weren't just legal documents, they were admissions of moral failure that could never be taken back. "There's one more thing," Mr. Stanton said as he collected the signed documents.
"Madison,
"Your grandmother left specific instructions for." This moment pulled out a final envelope marked to be opened after justice is served. Inside was a letter and 3 smaller envelopes labeled with Uncle Robert's, Jessica's, and Daniel's names. "My dearest Madison," I read aloud, "if you're reading this, then my plan has worked and justice has finally been served. I want you to know how proud I am of you for standing up for yourself and demanding accountability from people who should have protected you." I looked up at their faces as I continued reading. But I also want you to understand that this was never just about punishment. It was about giving you the power to choose mercy or justice, forgiveness or consequences. The choice of what kind of person you want to be going forward. The smaller envelopes contained individual letters from Grandma Ruth to each of them. As they read their personal messages, I could see the impact of her words. Uncle Robert actually sobbed as he read his letter. Jessica covered her mouth in shock. Daniel closed his eyes and shook his head slowly. "What did she say to you?" I asked. Uncle Robert looked up with tears in his eyes. "She said she hoped losing everything would teach me what it felt like to be powerless. But she also said she believed I could become the man she once thought I was, before greed corrupted me." Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. "She told me that my children deserved better than a mother who stole from orphans. She said she hoped I would use this as an opportunity to teach them about real values, instead of just wealth and status." Daniel folded his letter carefully. "She reminded me that I swore an oath as a lawyer to uphold justice," she said she was, giving me a chance to remember what that really means. The room fell silent as the weight of Grandma Ruth's final message settled over us. Even in death, she was still teaching lessons, still trying to guide her family toward redemption. "There's one more part to this," I said, reaching for Grandma Ruth's final letter. She left instructions for what comes next. I read the last paragraph. Aloud, "Madison, you now have the power to decide whether this family can heal or whether it will remain broken forever. The legal documents give you justice, but only you can choose whether to offer grace. Remember that mercy is not weakness, the strongest choice a person can make." I looked around the room at these people who had shaped so much of my pain and struggle. For 16 years, they had held power over me, making me feel small and unworthy. Now, the tables had turned completely. "Here's what's going to happen going forward," I announced. "You will all fulfill the terms of these agreements. Every payment, every legal obligation, every condition will be met exactly as specified. But I'm also going to offer you something you never offered me, a chance to earn back trust." Uncle Robert looked up with surprise. "What do you mean? You mean that if you follow through on your commitments, if you show genuine remorse through your actions, and if you treat me with the respect you should have shown all along, then in 5 years we can discuss modifying some of these terms." Jessica's eyes widened. "You would do that? After everything we've done?" "I'm not doing it for you," I said honestly. "I'm doing it because Grandma Ruth was right. I get to choose what kind of person I want to be. I choose to be someone who believes in redemption, even for people who don't deserve it." Daniel cleared his throat. "Madison, I know I have no right to ask, but is there any chance we could still be a family? A real family this time?" I thought about his question for a long moment. "That depends entirely on you. Family isn't about blood, it's about how you treat each other. You've spent 16 years proving you don't know how to be family to me. If you want that to change, you'll have to show me through your actions, not your words." Over the next hour, we worked out the practical details of the arrangements. Uncle Robert would transfer the property deeds within 30 days. Jessica would handle the condo transfer through her real estate agent. Daniel would begin providing legal services immediately and establish the scholarship fund within 60 days. Most importantly, they would all begin their monthly payments the following week, automatically withdrawn from their accounts to ensure consistency. As they prepared to leave, each of them approached me individually. Uncle Robert's apology was gruff, but seemed genuine. Jessica hugged me awkwardly and promised to do better. Daniel simply shook my hand and said he hoped to earn back my respect. Caroline was the last to approach me. "Madison, I'm so sorry about all of this. I had no idea what they had done to you." "I know you didn't," I said, giving her a real hug. "You're still welcome here anytime. This is still your family home, too." After they all left, Mr. Stanton and I spent another hour reviewing the legal protections now in place and discussing the management of my expanded estate. Between Grandma Ruth's inheritance and the restitution agreements, I was now worth over $4 million. "What will you do now?" he asked as he prepared to leave. I looked around the ranch house that was truly mine. At the art studio space I was already planning to set up in the back barn. At the rolling hills where I could paint landscapes for the rest of my life. "I'm going to live," I said simply. "I'm going to create art, take care of this land, and build the life Grandma Ruth always believed I deserved. 6 months later, I received my first payment from all three of them. Uncle Robert's business ownership transfer had been completed. Jessica's condo was in my name, and Daniel had already helped me establish a foundation for supporting young artists. More importantly, they had all maintained respectful communication with me, asking about my art and my life without demanding anything in return. The scholarship fund Daniel established had its first recipient, a young woman from a low income family who reminded me a lot of myself at 18. When I met her at the award ceremony, she thanked me for believing in artists who didn't have family support. "We have to look out for each other," I told her. Thinking of Grandma Ruth's words about choosing grace over bitterness, the ranch had become everything I dreamed it could be. I'd converted the old barn into a studio space where I taught art classes. 2 local children. The back pasture had been transformed into a sculpture garden featuring works by regional artists. The house itself had become a haven for creativity and healing. Last week, Jessica called to tell me that her daughter had expressed interest in art and asked if I might consider giving her some lessons. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the beginning of something new, not the old family built on secrets and theft, but a new one built on honesty and mutual respect. Standing on the front porch where Grandma Ruth and I used to paint together, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I finally understood what she had given me. It wasn't just justice or money or property, she had given me the power to choose my own future and the wisdom to choose it well. For the first time in my life, I truly felt at home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. This one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.